Indiana Jones. What an introduction. Yes, so I'm here today to talk to you about, is sustainable enough? Well, actually, I'm also here to show off my Indiana Jones hat. I do have a hat. I don't have the whip, but I have everything else going. But before I talk about is sustainable enough, I really want to actually just tell you who I am and where I'm coming from and why I've kind of gone on this journey, on this crusade, but no, this journey to find out what is sustainable and is it even the right thing to be looking for. First and foremost, I am a perfumer. I actually was born into a cosmetics factory. I mean, literally, our house when I was growing up until I was about 3 or 4 was a cosmetics factory. On the stove where there were jam pans full of soap and lotions and potions and all sorts of different things. And I got to about 19 and I thought I'd better get a job. So I went to work for my parents' factory. And I stumbled into the perfumery. And it's actually a really interesting and kind of exotic place because you've got these barrels turning up from all over the world with these weird and wonderful kind of concoctions inside. You had lemongrass coming from Cochin, or you had sandalwood coming from Mysore, or vetiver coming from Java. And I just thought, wow, where are these places? You know, what are these things? And I got to mix them up. It's kind of like alchemy. I got to mix them up and put them into pots and send them off to fragrance soaps and things all over the place. And that was really, really interesting. And then something quite dramatic happened. We realized that, in actual fact, these materials, this lemongrass and this vetiver and these different exotic sounding things, they had been adulterated. So the people that had sold us them had actually used chemicals to make cheap replicas of these oils and to make themselves an extra little bit of cash. Now, it's a family business. I'm thinking, that is awful. Why would these people do that? I'm incensed. When we talk to the suppliers and ask them, why would you do something like that? You sold us lemongrass oil. Why has it got these extra chemicals in? We don't want to use those things. And they said, what do you expect? I went away thinking, well, what did I expect? When I looked at how we've been treating our suppliers, we've been phoning them up every day. We're a fast-growing business. Phone them up every day. We need more. We need more. Business is going crazy. And it's got to be cheaper. You've got to send it to us cheaper, and I need it now, and I want it exactly this way. They didn't have very many options. All they could do was supply. You know yourself, if you're in business, you don't want to go out of business. How are you going to do that? How are you going to keep your price down? You can put these extra cheap chemicals in. And that was quite an interesting point for me. In fact, it was one of those points where I realized business is actually driving a lot of these problems. It's business that's behind, and this mentality in business is behind a lot of the problems that we see out there, especially around sustainability. So that's kind of my first lesson, if you like. Then I had the delightful job of then going out with my colleagues to see where these materials came from, and that was really exciting. That meant that Cochin, it no longer was this kind of weird name on a barrel, but it's somewhere I've been. Mysore, Java, these different areas, these different places suddenly became living, breathing things. I got to meet people, got to see how these materials were processed, how they were grown, who actually physically picked them, put them into a distiller, or processed them. And through doing that, I really understood and connected to the fact that we were a part of the same thing. We're part of a chain, and it's a supply chain, but it's more than that. It was a connection. Sometimes the things we saw weren't good. It wasn't just the chemicals I had to worry about. One point in India, I got picked up from the airport in Goa in a blacked-out Mercedes car. It took me off to a factory, which I then discovered was an illegal factory for sandalwood, and that we were dealing with smugglers. That was a bit of a problem. I learned a couple of lessons. One is, don't get into a blacked-out Mercedes car if you don't know where you're going and how to get back. Luckily, they took me back to the airport in time. But the other is, sometimes you can be dealing with people that you shouldn't be dealing with. You know, especially when you put yourself out there, you realize this is the face of it, and this is what these people look like. And so that's exciting, but it's also a little bit dangerous. Maybe another pivotal moment for me then was going to Sumatra. In Sumatra, we're all aware that in Indonesia you have the orangutan. That's a photograph I took when I was in Sumatra. It's become kind of like the poster boy, if you like, for palm oil. The problem with palm oil, it's grown in Sumatra on a huge scale. It's an amazing crop, palm oil. It's probably in some of the snacks that we've got outside right now. It'll be in chocolate, in margarines. It's a biofuel. It can be used to make soap, and that's how I got involved with it. It's a very high yielding, which means the tree itself gives you tons and tons of oil. It's almost like a miracle. You think, wow, this is great. The more of this we get, we can solve our problems when it comes to petrochemicals and oil and all that. We can use palm oil. The only problem is you have to rip down the rainforest to do that. One slight drawback. For me, when I'd seen the rainforest and the orangutans living in it and all the other species, I had one of those weird analogies that popped into my head. I thought, you look out the window here and you can see central London, and you think of all of the culture and the history and the livelihoods and the people living there and all the value we attribute to that. Think, well, it's like me coming up with a proposal to say, well, let's turn that into a car park. It's perfectly functional. It'll be great. You just wouldn't do it. You wouldn't be able to afford it for a start. It's too expensive. And it was just a crazy thing to think. But you go to the rainforest and you look at all that wildlife, the ecosystem, you look at how rich and how diverse it is, and you think, well, that's exactly what we're doing. We're just cutting that down and we're turning it into a car park. It just happens that we get palm oil out of it for a period of time. And there was this little switch, because I was looking at that, I thought, but you can do a palm plantation in Indonesia, and that's perfectly sustainable. There's nothing wrong with that. There you go. You're growing. You've got this miracle oil coming in. You put a few chemicals in. You get a few people to run around, pick the stuff up, and press it into oil. That's easy. Sustainable. You can keep doing that for quite a long time. But that doesn't feel right, does it? That doesn't give the wildlife, it doesn't give the orangutan a place to live. It doesn't provide a service. In cutting down the rainforest, you actually burn the peatland. You create this huge smog that covers all of Southeast Asia during the burning season, releases huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You move indigenous people off the land. It's just not, it doesn't mean anything to me. How can that be sustainable? So that was where I had to change the way I was thinking, and I was looking for something, or some inspiration, some way forward. Got to this point, but how do you progress on? What does the future then look like? And that's when I met two remarkable individuals that I'm going to use as examples that I feel kind of inspired me and into a new place, into something that was actually beyond the sustainable. The first is Paul. This is Paul Yeboah. He's from Ghana. I consider him a good friend now. Visit him quite a few times. But the first time that I visited him, he really kind of transformed my way of looking, especially when it came to growing, farming, agriculture. He'd worked as a cashew farmer in a monastery for a number of years, and then he was able to go on a new course, which taught him a different type of agriculture. We call it permaculture, but essentially it was looking at nature and seeing how can we fit in better with nature using agriculture. He went away, and he started to work with local farmers. He took me to see a couple of these local farmers. And it was this that really highlighted to me how big a difference this can make. So he took me to a field, and there was a track down the middle of this field, dirt track, out in sub-Saharan Africa, pretty hot, red soil. And on one side, there's a big open field, nice and neat and tidy, and it's growing cassava. I don't know if you know what cassava is, but it's like a large root vegetable, a bit like a sweet potato, something like that. Tons of these stakes all stuck in the ground. The sun's baking down, so you need to irrigate it, you need to give it water. There's not much fertility in the soil, so you've got to put a few extra chemicals in. Then you get a few pests, so you've got to put some pesticides on, and blah-de-blah. And that all costs quite a bit of money for the farmer. Anyway, Paul said, what do you think of that? And I was like, well, it looks very neat and tidy, and that's how I expect a field of crops to look. He said, look across the road. I looked across the road, and there was, to me, kind of unkempt kind of forest. He said, if you look into there, every single species within that, everything growing in that same size plot of land as this cassava field is edible. So he had mangoes and bananas and plantains, something called moringa. He even had vines like black pepper growing up these different trees. And he said, the same amount of cassava. You can get the same amount of cassava out of there. And I thought, that can't be right, can it? Because this is all neat and tidy, and we've done it all, squared away, and this is a complete mess, to my eyes. But in actual fact, it's exactly what he wanted. All these different species, they fit with one another. They complemented each other. Some brought more fertility to it. Some helped to reduce evaporation, so less water was needed. He didn't need to put irrigation and chemicals in. So I thought, well, Paul must be some sort of miracle worker. He's kind of, I don't know how he's done this, but I like it. And so he said, well, come and have another look at another trick I've done. Okay, great. So we go out to a river. And the river, 7 years previous, had been running dry because the chief of the local village, Ghana has a lot of chiefs. It makes it quite difficult to work there. And it's good fun working with them. But this particular chief had allowed the farmers to cut right up to the edge of the river, right up to the river bank. The river bank then started to collapse, and they were losing the river. It was drying up. So he said to Paul, seeing as I was this miracle worker, bring me the river back. I said, well, okay, I'll give it a go. Give me 1 kilometre stretch, 50 yards either side of the river, and I'll give it a go. And he planted indigenous trees, so he planted just local trees. And what those trees did was amazing. They brought the river back. They began to, the root system held the river bank. They soaked water in at a slower rate, so that meant the water was released more slowly. They provided shelter so that there was less evaporation, and it meant that the river, over the course of 6 or 7 years, began to flow. Not only that, but it began to flow clean. So it meant that it had been cleaned by the root system, and you had this miraculous river arrive back. Now, after this, I was kind of blown away. And this wasn't just the only thing he'd done. He'd done a lot of different things. So we decided to start working with Paul, and he came out with a proposal to take a 20-acre plot of land that was practically useless. It had been used for road building. They'd scraped all the fertile soil off the top, and they took gravel from the site, and they used that to grade or to make the road. All the farmers there knew that land was useless. They said, well, what are you going to take that for? Gold mining? There's no way you can grow any crops on it. And he said, no, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to show you how I can restore this land, and I can grow crops on here, and I can make a profit. And that's the interesting thing. On this 20-acre of land now, Paul has maybe he's probably by the end of the speech 5 or 6 different businesses. He's a crazy good entrepreneur as well. And he put these 4 or 5 different businesses on there, one selling mushrooms from waste sawdust that was being burnt off, another pressing moringa oil and drying the leaf from the moringa. Moringa it grows well in Africa and in India as well, and it's kind of like a superfood. There's a good market for it. He has soap making, so he can make his own soap and sell it locally. He has all these different enterprises, and he's growing crops, and he's also able to supply me in particular with some essential oils and some moringa oil. And each of those businesses is making a profit. Well, that's quite exciting. He's taken that piece of land and he's restoring that as part of his business model. That's his business. So I'll take you on to another fellow that I admire as well. This is Limber. Limber Cabrera he was born in the Peruvian Amazon. He's lived there all his life. He's had a number of different jobs. I know he was a documentary maker for a while, but he settled on really as an environmentalist and ecologist. And I said to him one day, we're looking for rosewood oil. Now, rosewood oil is endangered. Rosewood tree is a great hardwood that can be used. Many of you probably have heard of it in furniture design, and it also gives you a beautiful oil that you can use in perfumes. Now, probably in the past, even myself may have been responsible for this endangerment, and I kind of think that's not good. I don't want to keep being a part of that process. So I talked to Limber, said, is there any rosewood around you? And he went off. And his dad actually came back and said, I found somewhere with rosewood trees. It's a large concession, so it's a large piece of forest that's got illegal loggers on it. At the moment, he said, it looks like Avatar. People are there, they're cutting trees down illegally, they've got big machinery moving things around. It all just sounded horrendous. He said, but if you give me the money, I'll go and buy that concession for you. It's 6,000 hectares, so it's the size of Auckland City, this piece of land. So he went off, we give him the money, he went off, he disappeared for 3 weeks, we didn't hear anything. So I'm thinking, that was a good idea. What are we going to do? Anyway, he turns back up 3 weeks later. He says, I moved the loggers on, I've set up camp, and I've started to steward and to look after this piece of land. He then worked on a plan to work through this 6,000 hectares on a kind of cycle, which meant that you didn't have to lose any species you didn't need. You can pollard the tree, which is basically cut it at chest height, and it will grow back. So it means that you can actually keep the rainforest standing, and you can still take what you need out of it. So it's like having central London without making it into a car park. You can keep the interactions. In actual fact, we've seen tapir come back, jaguars come back. They have had poisonous snake bites. We've also had some death threats, and we've also had a number of other things. It's a treacherous area to be in. When I got there, actually, I went upriver with Limber, and when we arrived on site, he said, "Oh, thank God we didn't meet any river pirates." I thought, but the only way back is on river. Like, are we going to meet them or not? But it was fine. We got back okay. But it's a treacherous area. So you can see that there's some examples, and I have actually got more, I just don't have time to show you now, of ways that people can have businesses that are helping to restore and regenerate landscapes and give themselves livelihoods. And it's really my passion. It's what lights a fire in me, is that we can connect these businesses and that we can prove that these models can be done, that we don't just have to feel bad about the way human beings are and shrug our shoulders and think we just cut forests down, it's what we do. In actual fact, it's a mentality, and it can change, and it has changed. You know, what do you want? Do you want landscapes that are looking like this? This is a photo I took in Kenya of an eroding landscape. Do you want food forest? Do you want rainforest? Do you really want to see something for your children and your children's children? In actual fact, I think my vision is if everybody went away and became a Limber and a Paul, if everybody was contributing to protecting and restoring habitat, rainforest, whatever it is, then that would be quite an incredible future for us all and something we could be excited about. And I think that's it. Thank you.